Hello, this is Professor Gaughan and Professor Vance from Colorado State University in Pueblo, and we are creating this presentation so that students can learn how to succeed in a 100 level history course. Dr. Vance is going to start us out with some recommendations about reading the textbook.
Approaches to studying the textbook. Your very first step is to read the summary. The summary for the chapter is usually available either online or in the textbook itself. If you read the summary, you will know what the chapter is about.
Okay.
Step 2. Read the questions. There are study questions about each chapter, again, either available online at the textbook website or in the textbook itself. Read the questions so that you know where the chapter is going to take you. Step 3. Read the titles. Read the title of the chapter. Read the subtitles. Read anything in bold or in color in that chapter and make a mental note. What is this chapter going to cover?
You also want to pose your own questions about the titles. In other words, don't let the textbook determine everything that you're going to think about the chapter, but ask questions of your own. One of the ways to do this is to think about the professor's clues or themes. Sometimes a professor will come right out and say what the themes of the course are. So as you're reading the textbook chapters, you can also be asking yourself, how does this fit into the larger themes of the course? What kinds of questions is my professor interested in? Sometimes the professor is not that explicit about the themes of the course, but you can tell by what you have been tested on, what the professor talks about in class, and what the professor asks you about. So you get clues from your professor about the kinds of things that are of interest to her or him.
Step 6. Notice any maps, dates, or names in the textbook chapter. Cause and effect is very important in studying history, as is chronology, so that you can make connections between different parts of the world, different time periods at different places. It's less important perhaps for you to remember the exact date that something occurred, and more important to remember if that occurred in relationship to something else that is important either in that chapter or in a chapter you have studied previously. So go through the chapter before you read it and look at the maps. Where are you going in this chapter? And who are you talking about? And when are you talking about it? The next step is to read the text. At this point, you're not actually going to read every single word with the same weight. Here, start with the chapter's introduction and conclusion, if they exist, and skim the chapter with purpose. Keep the following journalistic questions in your mind as you read: who, what, when, where, why, and how. As you skim along, notice anything that has been italicized or written in bold or in color, and make a special mental note of those pieces of information.
Finally, you want to write a summary of the chapter. Oops, we're not quite finally yet. But number 7, write a summary of the chapter in your own words. Write down about 5 or 6 sentences. Don't just write when the professor gives you a written assignment, but actually use writing to help you understand what the textbook has said to you, what the chapters have said. You also want to pose questions about what you have just read. Once again, return to the themes of the course or the clues that the professor has given you. Think about the questions that the book has asked you or the website has asked you, and write down the answers to those questions too. That will help you think critically about the material that you have read. And this is the conclusion of our section on studying the textbook. What we want to do now is turn to approaching and analyzing primary sources.
Step 1 in analyzing primary sources. Actually look at the document or image. Open it if it's a computer file, or open your textbook and actually look at it. What are your first impressions? Just take 30 seconds and mentally go through the source. What do you notice? Look at the source as if it is from a distance. Step 2, reread questions on how to read primary sources. Often your professor will have given you questions that you are to answer about the particular primary source you're studying. There are often questions that are posed in the textbook. Think about those questions as you look at the primary source.
You also want to read the introductory material to the primary sources. You're not always given introductory material, but usually if the textbook has primary sources within it, then those primary sources are preceded by an introduction by the author of the textbook. If you read that introduction, it will help you to understand what's going to happen in the primary source. The same is true with material that's online. A lot of times there's introductory material to the primary sources, which will help you find the context for those sources. How to read really depends on the length of the assignment. If you get fewer than 10 pages assigned to you from the professor in a particular primary source, then you should know it very well. If you get longer passages, then you need to consider how to skim those passages. Professor Vance, do you want to talk about skimming?
Agreed. So for passages that are over 10 pages, skim the source and look for patterns. Look at each page in the document and notice any differences that you see as you're skimming along. What is being discussed? What is the pattern? And think again about the professor's motives. Why was your professor assigning you the entire source to read, or a large portion of the source to read? What is the point of reading so much? The next step, step 5, is to write down answers to the questions.
Finally, step 6, and our last step for approaching primary sources, is ask yourself, why did the professor make me read this? The professors always have a reason for assigning a particular primary source. How does it connect with what you've been reading in the textbook? How does it connect with the themes of the class? Why did she make me read this now? How do the dates and the places and everything else from the primary source fit in with the other material that we're working on? Finally, we come to quizzes. And really, once you've done everything we just said, quizzes and exams are not going to be that difficult for you.
Use the background information that you have attained in reading and skimming the chapter. This is not a test of memorization skills, more a test of your critical thinking skills. What did you pick up about the chronology, about the process, about historical relationships?
We have one final note to make, and that is, come visit the professor in office hours. That's why we have office hours. Once you do all this, if anything is still confusing to you, we are here to help you answer your questions.
We are, and we would love to see you. Good luck.